Welcome, everyone, to the Eclipse Models for Privacy deep dive on privacy models. Very happy to be doing this today. We have with us our moderator, Dr. Ann Cavoukian, and then, of course, we have our experts who will be, providing their perspectives on a couple of questions, Steve Hickman and Samuel Martin. And of course, we have our co-leads on this particular project, which is Antonio. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to go very quickly over the bios of our experts. They will be available along with the recording after this session. So we have Samuel Martin, who's assistant professor at the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. And I won't go over all of this. As I said, it will be available after, but he has an impressive background. We also have Steve Hickman, and again, impressive background. He's had experience working in the telecom field, aerospace manufacturing, so perfect, backdrop to what we're talking about here. But I think most importantly, it's his current interest with respect to modeling tools. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this on to our moderator, Dr. Ann Cavoukian, to begin the session and the question.
Thank you, Michelle. Such a pleasure to be here today. And I look forward to this discussion. I think it's going to be very, very interesting. Let me start with Samuel, posing a question to you, Samuel. Can you help us to understand exactly what do we mean by privacy models?
Yeah, absolutely, Anne, and it's a great place to start indeed. We often hear about privacy models, and the name of our Eclipse group really speaks to that. But the term quote-unquote model can evoke different images to different people, no? For some, it might bring to the mind miniature remodeling. Maybe others think about an individual who behaves as a role model to imitate it. Or still others may think of scientific abstractions like the Ethem model. And of course, there's the AI models that are all the rage now. So let's unpack this a bit. When we talk about privacy models, we're essentially dealing with various creatures. On the one hand, we have descriptive models. These help us understand which aspects of a system are relevant for privacy matters. So what personal data it handles, how, where it's processed, and so on. It's crucial to know how personal data flows through a system because this lets us see where privacy risks might be. Then there are the prescriptive models or guidelines or patterns that help solve and manage privacy concerns within these systems. So these descriptive models for privacy do not live in isolation, but they take system models that already exist and they extend, they enhance, they enrich them. So say you have a data model, we could annotate certain data as personal and thus mark it for privacy protection. Or in a workflow, we might label steps that handle personal data. So essentially, these privacy models are like extensions to existing system models. It's about adding an overlay of metadata that make our existing system models smarter and help us navigate the complexities of privacy. But there can be privacy models elsewhere. Beyond these traditional system models. For instance, they can model the context of a system, showing who handles personal data. You also can have requirements models that include privacy requirements for sure, threat models to foresee potential issues and things sometimes go wrong and you need to model the threats, also the bad side. And you can also incorporate privacy models into the business development process, the business and development process itself. So for instance, if you have a model of your process, where you have some roles, some tasks, etc., you can make sure that everyone involved knows their part in managing and protecting privacy. Also, if you have an assurance model with all the evidence you collect, you'll also be able to record evidence to demonstrate privacy compliance and so on and so forth. I also like to take advantage to alleviate some fears about the model because there's that misconception that sometimes engineers think of models as something that's related to arcane modeling languages, something that is really hidden and complex to understand. Far from it. Models are all around us every day. So, for instance, when a developer creates a database model in SQL, what they are doing is, well, we call it a database model for some reason, don't we? Any source code, in fact, is essentially a model, as it represents an abstraction of real-life processes and structures. Even the law itself is a model of societal rules and expectations, isn't it?
Wonderful. That's very, very helpful. Thank you, Samuel. Let's now turn to Steve. Steve, could you please shed some light on this question as well, but from a practitioner's point of view?
Sure. And if you think about it from an implementation perspective, if you're trying to implement a privacy preserving application, there are a lot of different things you have to consider. There's the law, the underlying technology that you're using, or that third parties you work with use, company goals. All of these things, there are a lot of different moving parts. All these things continue to evolve, and they evolve independently. That constant change makes it very hard to be confident that I'm doing the right thing legally and doing it in a way that works sustainably for my organization. And this is where formal models can really help. First of all, for two reasons. First, formal models help ensure that everyone's speaking the same language, no matter which stakeholder, whether it's the legal team, software developers, product design, or other parties. And second, these formal models also help ensure that everything important is addressed. If you think about it, and as Samuel said, the law itself is a model, it's an abstraction. Here's, for example, the US Fair Housing Act does not say, quote, Facebook shall not use column A of table 1 when identifying potential ad slots for housing ads. I mean, it would be absurd to think that it would be written that way. Instead, what it says is that the Fair Housing Act, quote, prohibits discrimination in housing because of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, including gender identity and sexual orientation, familial status, or disability, unquote. In other words, it's addressing the problem at an abstract level. If you look at that wording, those concepts, that's what they are. They are concepts. It identifies the concepts that matter, but it doesn't look at a specific implementation. Practitioners, people actually out there dealing with this, have to determine how those abstractions map to their specific implementation. The problem, though, is that the law as written is not formalized. It isn't written to be machine readable yet. Okay. There are some efforts being done in that regard. Stanford's been involved in those, but it's not yet there. And given the nature of most lawmakers, I doubt it ever will be. The point is, the law is not code. Formal models bridge that gap. They convert human language into a formal representation with well-defined semantics. And as such, then they aid in mapping concepts to implementation, because development tools can use those formal models to ensure that that mapping is done and that all the relevant laws or rules are applied consistently, because now you have this formal descriptive model that you can apply those rules to. Most software developers are not going to go to law school. I'm kind of an anomaly in that regards. But if we have formal models that summarize the law, they don't need to.
Got it. I wonder when we'll get there.
Yeah.
And as I listen to you both explain this concept of privacy model, I can't help but think about how the development of privacy models is actually a very, very practical means, if you will, to help translate the privacy by design principles into functional requirements. That would be so much value added. I see the development and use of privacy models embodying the means by which to embed privacy into technology, business processes, and infrastructure. And that's exactly what we need to do. So I'll turn it back to you as experts. I'd like to ask your thoughts on how privacy models fit into the privacy by design, data protection by design framework. And I'll start with Samuel again.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor indeed to discuss this, especially with someone who pioneered privacy by design. Yeah, it's privacy by design, that's quite relevant. It's become quite relevant in recent years. There's privacy and data protection by design and by default embedded in many laws around the world, like the GDPR, for instance.
Yes.
And even though I'm not a lawyer, I see how these models play a crucial role in helping us comply with these laws, as you both have explained before. So for instance, how can you know which data you're legally allowed to process, or how you shall protect it, or whether you're allowed to do whatever processes it's going through, etc.? You first need to know which personal data you're handling, don't you? You need a model of personal data. Then you have all the data subject rights, right to access, rectification, erasure, restriction, portability, objection, and you shall determine the scope of the data subject requests. So models come to help here as well, as they allow you to manage this. But models also help us uphold overall privacy principles and goals. So there's the accountability principle. You must be able to demonstrate and provide evidence that you behave well and you handle data responsibly. There's the transparency principle, ensuring that people know and understand who's using their data and why. The intervenability, allowing for corrective measures against data misuse. And essentially, models are vital tools that help us stick to these privacy principles and make them operational. So they can translate the law into system features, system requirements, as you both have mentioned or have hinted before. Yeah, sure.
And I love it, because operationalizing these principles is so important for them to actually be applied in workplace settings, government settings, practitioners' offices, or wherever. Thank you. Steve, would you like to add anything to this?
Yes, when you take those models and a couple of things. First of all, you take those models and you embed them in tooling, you can make that operationalization occur as you're developing the process. As individual practitioners are implementing for their particular organization. And the advantage that has here, a couple of things. First of all, the law varies across time and jurisdiction. Okay. As all practitioners, you're accountable for compliance with all these different variations, across both the relevant time and jurisdiction domains, which presents a real challenge because without tooling that actually enforces these models, what happens is you end up leaving stuff on the table. You end up generalizing.
Yes.
A lot of organizations just say, well, we're just going to do GDPR because it was the first one, and we just take the most general approach because we can't deal with all the variation. Like you look in the US and there's all these different states have slight variations on things. And it's not scalable to do that if you do it manually. So practically, this means we need to be able to, we need tools that will help us evaluate implementations across all these variations. Okay. Now, as it should be obvious, simply knowing the law behind all of this is a full-time job. There are multiple companies that is their function, is just summarizing these laws, making it available. But they're still doing it in a way that's not machine readable. That's why models are critical. Identifying these key principles creates significant cognitive load, trying to process all this information. But once we get the models, once we've identified these principles, the result of that work, once it's formalized, can be available either standalone or with tooling that can make this process evaluation tractable. If anything less than that, it's just the implementers end up being vulnerable to overlook something, and now you're potentially subject to fines or some other kind of enforcement, or maybe just reputational harm. There's just too many I's to dot and T's to cross. So these formal models, particularly formal models with tooling that helps enforce them and evaluate against them, becomes extremely critical. Does that make sense?
Totally. You framed it very well. Thank you very much. Just before we move on, I was going to ask Antonio if, before we move on to the final part of our session and take questions from our guests, of course. Antonio, would you like to contribute to what has been said so far about how we can actually try to define privacy models?
Yes, thank you, Anne. So there are 2 points I want to make from what has been discussed. First of all, we can see that there are many types of models, okay? So you can have a model at the architecture level. For instance, where do you store data? This is super important. If you store data on a mobile phone, it's not the same as if you store data in the cloud, okay? The second thing is you can have models on the process. For instance, what kind of process you are doing for impact assessment, okay? Or what kind of process you are having for engineering, okay? This is an important part for us, okay? And of course, the last thing is the solution or the measure, okay? So so-called PETs, privacy enhancing technologies, okay? What kind of models they are using and that you have to follow in order to have good implementation, okay? So that's the first point. So models are everywhere because they represent our mindset, okay? The second thing, which I believe is important, and I've seen all of you mentioning this somehow implicitly, is that models are communication instruments, okay? So models can reflect stakeholder expectation. The policymaker can express through a model what it expects to a manager or an architect. And also the architect or manager can have another model, of course related, which we will use to express to developers how they want to implement, okay? So this would be the first thing, reflect expectation. The second thing is the level of formality. We said it can be formally expressed, okay? So we have models that are informally expressed. Like when I'm saying something, it's a model actually. The law is a semi-formal expression of models because they use a very strict vocabulary and logical aspects, okay? And of course, UML and things like that are the tools we are using in engineering to achieve that, okay? And the last thing is the level of details of the model, okay? So the software engineer should share with managers a higher level model, so we say abstract model, because he wants the manager to understand. But he's going to share maybe a more detailed model to its own engineers because he has to explain how implementation is going on.
Very helpful. I'm really convinced that establishing and using privacy models is, in fact, the next step in the evolution of privacy by design. And I'm so grateful for all the progress that's been made. As you know, we now have ISO 31700 standard for privacy by design. I was delighted when the International Standards Organization made privacy by design an ISO standard. That was huge. And there's new work underway on an ISO technical standard for guidance on privacy for privacy engineering models. So that's very, very important too. In this session, I think we've only had time to scratch the surface on the questions that we want to explore on privacy models. And we haven't had a chance to open up for questions from our guests, which we'll do very shortly. But before we go to questions from our guests, I do want to ask you, Antonio, to briefly talk about our models for privacy interest group under the Eclipse Foundation, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen, okay? Hope you see it, okay? So we show here actually the objective of this working group, or say interest group. Okay, the first thing is we want share practice for privacy engineering based on models, and we hope that the explanation we just provided show the interest on that. Okay, the second is, okay, we want to create synergies to foster development of an ecosystem of privacy models we can share, because sharing models is sharing knowledge, is sharing reuse. Okay, and the thing is, of course, to promote the creation, use, and sharing of privacy models. Okay, what I need to mention is that not everything needs to be shared. Okay, models can be shared, but not the implementation. Okay, you could decide to have the specification of privacy enhancing technology, and you publish it because you want people to understand how it works, but you do not publish its implementation because maybe it includes intellectual property rights. Okay, so things like that. So you can have that kind of let's say approach. Okay, so also you can decide to have a model that is shared but not developed as open source. But you also can do the same thing, so providing both the model and the open source. This is the business part of it. We decide as we want, as long as we can share what is important to be transparent. Okay, so transparency is very important, and because otherwise there's no trustworthiness, no trust between the consumer and the technology, between the supply side and the demand side. Okay, and the advent of AI is making this even more important. We say that AI will not survive if we do not understand how it works and whether it follows the obligation and things like that. Okay, of course, the rest we can encapsulate. You can have let's say trade advantage and things like that, patents. You can encapsulate, but you need to be transparent. Okay, so to this end, we have started two standards. Okay, one which is on policy and behavior interoperability, 21823-5, which we can use, and the second is the one you mentioned, guidance on the use of models for privacy engineering. Okay, 27564. So I want to show to you how it positions itself in the landscape of standards. Sorry, I'm going to show a number of standards. You will see that. Okay, so first of all, here you can see this picture, some important standards. On top, you have what I would call the foundational standards, privacy framework, which actually includes principles very much influenced from the 7 privacy by design principle which you came up with, Anne. Okay, and then you have privacy impact assessment. How do we do this? But this is not sufficient. You need privacy by design, you need practice, you need architecture, you need engineering. Okay, and so here we have a bunch of standards which are related to engineering and privacy by design. Okay, so you mentioned, for instance, 31700, but I want to mention here the one we are working on, which is 27564 privacy models. Once you have this, you have other standards. So I want to show that actually, yes, you have organizational standards, and yes, you have on the left, and on the right, you have technology standard, de-identification framework, and things like that. Okay, once you have this, you can start to build. So you have both data and AI, you have standards, you have IoT and digital twins and applications. Okay, and the applications, so you have, for instance, privacy for smart cities, privacy for fintech, age assurance, and the newly started privacy of avatars. Okay, so this is how we see the importance of the privacy models here and our work in the group to the community. Thank you.
Great. Oh, this is wonderful. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle now. Thank you very much, Antonio.
So thank you so much, Anne and Samuel, Steve, and Antonio. And before we go to the open session for questions and discussion, what I'd like to do is just to give a sense of our next steps. So we will wrap up after the open questions. But I think what's important is we're going to post this recording on our Models for Privacy website. And what we'd like to do is perhaps schedule some further sessions if this is of interest to others in our community, to continue this deep dive on the issue and work on privacy models for engineering. And in fact, we invite members of the community to ask questions of our experts or to volunteer to be an expert as part of this deep dive. So we do welcome that. So in finalizing, again, I'd like to thank Dr. Ann Cavoukian as moderator, excellent moderator, and then Samuel for his expertise in really understanding kind of this broader base of what privacy models are. And of course, Steve Hickman coming from that industry perspective and legal, which is fantastic. And then of course, Antonio, who kind of comes from the standards world and allows us or enables us to have that vision into what's going on internationally around standardization of this activity. So what we'll do is we will stop the recording and we can actually go into further discussions and questions. Thank you so much.
Of course.